So in the last section, we talked a lot about the dominant triad, and we talked a lot about the tonic triad. But actually, as we talked about in week 1, we can build a triad on any note within the scale, and that's exactly what we're just going to do now.
Yep. We're going to start with chord scale degree 1, going to go up through all the scale degrees, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, and we're going to build a triad on each scale degree. Now, just to be clear in how we're notating these things for differentiation, we're using numbers for scale degree, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. When we build triads on each of those scale degrees, that triad is also chord 1 or chord 5 or chord 4. We use Roman numerals when we're talking about chord or triad numbers instead of normal numbers.
Okay, so if we take C as our tonic in this case, we're going to build a triad on C. It's the first degree of the scale, and as Nikki said, we're going to call that chord 1. Now in a major key, let's hear it again, we've got a major chord. Okay, let's go into chord 2. Chord 2 in a major key is minor. Chord 3 is minor. Chord 4 is major. Chord 5 is major. Chord 6 is minor, and chord 7 is the one that was different. This is a diminished triad. Just to recap, between the first and the fifth, we've actually got a diminished fifth, not the interval of a perfect fifth as we have with the others.
This would be a perfect fifth.
This is slightly smaller, so we get a diminished fifth. And in between, we've got a minor third from the first to the third. So, a diminished fifth and a minor third gives us a diminished triad. Chord 7 is a diminished triad.
Now, what's important to spot here as we go up the major scale is that we've got yet another pattern emerging in music theory. You remember that our major scale always has the pattern of tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone, intervals as we ascend the scale degree numbers. When we build a triad on every single scale degree, travelling up the octave, we get that pattern of major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, diminished. That pattern stays the same whichever key you're playing in. Chord 5 is always major, chord 2 is always minor.
So we can take any note and build a triad on it, but actually it seems that when we look at music and when we analyse pieces of music, there are some chords that get more use, some chords that are used more often than others.
We saw with Twinkle Twinkle, with our little example, it was chord 1 and chord 5. It was the tonic and the dominant triads that were really important structurally. In common practice music theory, chords 1, 5 and also chord 4 are the three sort of most important structural building blocks. The subdominant, that's chord 4, often appears before chord 5, and it sort of extends the whole structure that we've described with those perfect and imperfect cadences.
But it's not just in big pieces of work from the common practice era that we see this. In fact, any diatonic melody, we can take and harmonise it with chords 1, chords 4 or chord 5. Since every single scale degree actually occurs in chord 1, 4 or 5, we can use these chords in conjunction with melodies built from this pool of notes.
There's a lot more to say and we will go on soon, but first we have to carry on with our triad building exercise. Okay, so now we've seen the patterns that come out through triads built in a major scale, but what happens when we do this with a minor scale?
Well, as you've predicted, based on what you know from the major scale, we're getting a whole new set of internal regular patterns emerging when we go through the triads that are built on each degree of a minor scale.
We're going to use A minor this time. So rather than C major, we're shifting to its equivalent minor. Starting with chord 1.
So chord 1 in A minor, you've guessed it, is A minor, so that's a minor chord on chord 1. If we move up to chord 2, we get a diminished triad.
So it's like the 7th chord from a major scale, it's got that same diminished quality.
Okay, then if we move on to chord 3, we get something interesting happening here because we're in our minor key. Now you'll remember from week 2, we talked about different types of minors. When we're looking at this just now, we're going to look at the harmonic minor, and that gives us a new chord on chord 3 that we've not discussed yet. So we've got a major third, but if we look at the distance between the root of the chord and the fifth, we've actually got 8 semitones now, which is 1 semitone more than the perfect fifth that we've already talked about. This is called an augmented fifth. So, a chord that has a major third and an augmented fifth, we're going to call an augmented triad.
And you'll realise that this is happening because chord 3 has the scale degrees 3 and 5 and 7 in it. And you'll remember that what characterised the harmonic minor scale was it had a sharpened 7th.
Okay, moving on to chord 4. We've got a minor triad. And then going on to chord 5. We've got a major triad, again encompassing this G sharp that was important. We now have a major triad. We move on to chord 6. We've got a major triad. And then we go to 7. We're back to another example of a diminished triad. Back to the tonic again.
Okay, so the properties that we get from the triads that we're building in the harmonic minor scale give us a really distinctive set of patterns of triads that emerge. We've got a mix of diminished, we've now got augmented, and we've also got that major fifth happening on the when we build up from the fifth degree of the scale, because we've got that leading note, because we've got that raised 7th. So it's really unambiguous. So moving around in different keys, that pattern of triads would emerge from any keynote using a harmonic minor scale.